Good Monday evening. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Arctic front and the ice storm associated with the Arctic front and a possible cold air damming event for the Carolinas and Virginia going into the beginning of next week. First, though, we're going to take a look at this Arctic front. It is not hard to see it, folks. You can see just based on the National Weather Service watches and warnings where it is in the country, really affecting Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia the most. That is bringing some disgusting ice and slush to most of the area, making travel conditions horrendous. So, first of all, thankfully, this isn't affecting the Carolinas and the eastern seaboard, but what we may have to deal with going into next week is a possible cold air damming event. So, first of all, this is the GFS model run, the 18Z GFS model run. This is valid Monday, January 30th. This is going to give a basic overview of the setup. Again, this is a week out still. The timing is still a little bit iffy. The exact setup is still a little bit iffy. We'll go into in a second why this type of setup is so tough to forecast and why we may not have any real answer for another at least day or two. We got this Arctic front that's going to move through, really affect Texas, Oklahoma, and into portions of Arkansas, Kentucky, and West Virginia, and this will continue moving off, bringing some cold rain to the Carolinas, and then moving off in the coast. And we think everything is done, and we are all good. It'll bring some cold air behind it, by the way. We'll talk about that here. So, looking at this basic setup, right, we've got three moving parts, and that's why it makes it so tough. We have this high pressure right here, 1048 millibar. That is extremely strong, and will bring some possible record temperatures to the northeast of the United States. We have a low pressure system that hasn't developed yet but will develop here. As you go a little bit forward, this will be a low pressure here, and this will move up the coast of the Carolinas. And then last but not least, we have a cold front somewhere right around here, and that will begin moving east, and they'll kind of all meet up in one area right here. So we've got the cold air, the low pressure, and the front making one disgusting mess here over the Carolinas and Virginia. So let's go ahead forward a little bit here in time. As we jump ahead, we'll see the formation of the low pressure here. We see the front starting to fill in a little bit, and it's all coming together. Meanwhile, while all this is happening, this Arctic front here, this Arctic high is moving further east and into the Atlantic Ocean, meaning the cold air is becoming less and less. So the two biggest question marks about this setup is going to be how much of the cold air is left, A, and B, how much moisture are we actually going to get? Because if you see here, I mean, there's little spits and spots of moisture, but there's not a whole lot according to this model run, which, I mean, we'll see how that changes. I will say I tend to think there'll be a little bit more moisture than this just because you get some baroclinic forcing with the front moving in and the moisture kind of sending back into the front. Normally that means it kind of squeezes out. Imagine a sponge, right? You put pressure on both sides of the sponge, you squeeze the water out. It's the same sort of situation here. So again, maybe a little bit more moisture than this model run is showing, but again, that cold air is a question mark, and we'll go into that a little bit in a second. Now, why wouldn't this be snow, right? Why would this be ice? Well, let's take a look here. This is also the GFS, just on a different website. The 850 millibar temperature. So this is where they kind of level in the atmosphere where the warm nose, which you may or may not have heard of before, we'll show it a little bit more in a second, would appear. Right? So this white line is the freezing line. Again, this is 850 millibars. This is a few thousand feet up in the atmosphere. And you can see this is Saturday going into Sunday. That storm, you can see the low pressure begin to crank up off the coast here. And look, we've got, this is 4 or 5 degrees Celsius above freezing. This would not be supportive of any sort of wintry precip. This would likely just be a very cold rain. As this moves up and further northeast and into the Atlantic, you do start to see this freezing line start to creep back into the Carolinas, though. This is why the timing is so iffy. Timing of the front, if that front is a little bit faster, maybe we see this colder temperature move in a little bit faster. Maybe if the low pressure forms a little bit slower, we get some more moisture into this colder air. There's a lot of moving parts, and that's why it's going to be tough to know for at least another day or two what's going to happen. So this is an example of a sounding here. You can see this warm nose right about here. All right, so we have this temperature line. This is 0 degrees, so this is the freezing mark. I'm going to get rid of this. There's a lot of clutter here. Anyway, so you see this freezing mark, this dotted line kind of moving up in this diagonal direction. And you see this temperature just, whoop, it looks like a nose right here. It just goes above freezing and then back below. So it's below freezing, below freezing, below freezing, and then above freezing, melting. So imagine a snowflake falling down, and then it melts, 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 and then it gets to the surface, and it freezes as long as this red number is below freezing, which you can see in this situation is not. But again, we're talking about a degree or two, right? So this would melt into either an ice pellet or freezing rain, which would bring nothing but ice and sloppiness, right? Now, we were just showing the GFS there. The GFS had that low pressure cranking up off the coast with the high pressure moving out and a front moving in along with it. Now, the Euro, right, the European model, shows two of the three aspects, but does not show a third. So we saw in the European model, again, this is valid 12Z today, Monday, January 30th. And we'll see this Arctic front, same sort of situation, moving further east and off the coast. But what you don't see happen, right? Well, let's see what you do see happen, right? So we see this high pressure right here, you know, cranking up. We'll see this front right now it's dry, but it'll start to crank up here and move further east. Now, what you won't see though is a low pressure form. So we'll go forward in time here. This is going into Sunday evening, Sunday night, Monday early morning, and the front, I mean, on the GFS, keep in mind, the GFS, that front, this is Sunday, midday Sunday, and that front is already in Indiana, Kentucky, and western Tennessee. While we go to the Euro here, and that front doesn't begin moving into that area until Tuesday afternoon. That's almost 40. That's actually over 48-hour difference. So again, timing completely different with these two models, which is why there's a lot of disagreement. You got too many moving parts, but you just never see a low pressure really crank up, right? I mean, just a whole lot of nothing. So why is this the case? Well, let's take a look at the 500 millibar vorticity. This is higher up in the atmosphere, and this is basically, think of it as like atmospheric energy. That's the easiest way I can explain it. Here in the GFS, so this is the GFS model, again, 18Z GFS model, we see this trough right here in this area of energy. This is into the Carolinas, into South Carolina, into Virginia, and this is where we'd get our low pressure. Remember that low pressure that cranked up off the coast right about here and moved up? This is basically an example. This is showing that, yes, you will have that front. You have the energy, you'll have the cold air, and this is the kind of setup you want to see here if you want a wintry storm in the Carolinas. If we go, though, to the Euro, same time, right? This is Monday midday. Same time, right? What happened? So we have this buffed up energy right here, and then we go to the Euro and a whole lot of nothing. GFS, we got this crazy energy trough, possible low pressure cranking up, and Euro, nothing. So that's really the difference. You don't see that. You don't see this high pressure, or excuse me, you don't see the low pressure crank up off the coast at all because there isn't any atmosphere. There isn't any energy in the atmosphere. No spin in the atmosphere, right? Now, the one thing I will say is you take a look at the Canadian model, and it does have, so this is really the big three medium range models, right? You have the Canadian, the Euro, and the GFS. Both the Canadian and the GFS have this pressure, have this vorticity really cranking up, have this trough moving through with some energy in the atmosphere. The Euro has a whole lot of nothing. So right now, I'm going to tend to side with the Euro and the Canadian model, but that could change very easily. A lot of times you'll see the GFS cave to the Euro. In this situation, because there's agreement with the GFS and the Canadian, I'm going to lean towards that right now. Again, that could very easily change. So again, we went over that possible setup. Front, we'll go over it one more time. Front moving through, moving east off the coast. We have this high pressure bringing in brutally cold temperature into the northeast and beginning to make its way down, dam up against the mountains, wedge up against the mountains, bringing some cold surface temperatures. And then we have this low pressure cranking up that gets kind of wedged up with the front, bringing some moisture, some possible ice maybe, and then moving up the coast. So right now there's not a whole lot of anything on models, but the basic setup is there for a possible cold air damming. A record setting, low temperature, high pressure, Arctic high pressure, right? That's going to bring down some cold air, wedge up against the mountains. You've got a possible low pressure cranking up off the coast and a front moving in that will possibly squeeze out some more moisture than even models right now tend to show. What we will know in the next day or two will probably be a little bit better idea of timing. Again, right now the Euro and the GFS are basically 2 days apart on that front. So that'll come into better picture, but the other thing that'll come into better picture is we'll go back to this energy, right? Do we get this cranked up energy, this vorticity? Do we get this trough, or do we have a whole lot of nothing like the Euro shows? Which one of these? Right now I tend to think this, but you never know. Again, we'll know hopefully in the next day or two, and I will go ahead and post another vlog when we do start to get some more information. Again, right now, just keep an eye out the beginning of next week. Again, this would be Sunday into Monday into Tuesday for some possible ice event in the Carolinas and Virginia, really along the eastern seaboard. Thank you all for listening and watching. I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. And again, keep an eye out for any changes to the weather.